Good morning. My name is Monica Wilson, and I am going to start us off in this space today with a short video, providing us with an opportunity to think about our approaches and our actions as they relate to land acknowledgements, appreciations, and reflections. Um, the organizers of today have put a lot of thought into our moving into action. What are we doing? And we wanted to have that reflected in this activity as well. And so to start, I want to draw back to a conversation from our from our winter occurrence, where there was a discussion around colonialism and coloniality. And so I want to draw back to those definitions that Dr. Matha provided, where colonialism, including white settler colonialism and land seizure, the transatlantic slave trade, religious missionary efforts, forceful invasion and occupation, and additionally, the epistemic violence and resulting legacy that persists today. And coloniality makes the distinction between colonialism and coloniality, where the latter being the ideological, epistemological, psychological afterlife of colonialism. The way that colonialism survives through books, criteria for academic performance, cultural patterns, aspirations, values placed on certain works of art, literature, accents, and pedagogies. I think the list probably goes on. And so our work here is in disrupting that, in taking an anti-colonial stance. And part of that is making room for all that has been lost through colonialism and the afterlife of colonialism, and centering those who have been most impacted. And what does that look like? I think that's a place that I get stuck. And through my own learning and journey, wanting to really move into action. And we've seen this starting to happen in many ways across this nation and across other nations. Canada in particular is one space I'm thinking of. And recently there was news about the California university system. The chancellor of the California university system announced that the system will be offering free tuition and fees to California residents who are members of federally recognized tribes. And there are currently 109 federally recognized tribes in California, home to more people of Native American and Alaska Native heritage than any other state in the country. And yet, for the past decade, Native American students have made up less than 1% of the university's total enrollment. And when I think about that enrollment piece, I also wonder about completion. And so this was, cost is an issue, right? And I think this is one piece of the burden, is figuring out the cost. But but then there's also still a lot of work to do about once students are there, right, being welcome. And having teaching and learning reflect the many ways that teaching and learning can happen and that students learn, particularly American Indian and Alaska Native students, appreciating the many ways from their culture, traditional ways and current ways of connection. This also doesn't speak to the complicated and racist and fraught system of federal recognition of tribes. And Greg Saris, the tribal chairman of Federated Indians of Graton Rancheria, which is in Northern California, who has had this tribe has had a long road with being recognized by the federal government has come in to say, we're actually going to provide funding for students who are California residents who are not part of federally recognized tribes, who belong to tribes that are not federally recognized. So he says California Native American students now have a clear path to the nation's top public education system with no financial roadblocks. In the spirit of our ancestors, we are driven to take care of our environment and our people. Inclusivity is our responsibility, and we are pleased to extend scholarships to California Native Americans from non-federally recognized tribes. We are helping to level the playing field and provide representation in higher education for all California Native American students. And this got me thinking about, well, what are we doing in Washington as a system? And I think that this work, right, the work in this community of practice and care, other work that's happening across the system, thinking about how we are in the classrooms, a more anti-racist approach, and that's important, and we're going to continue that conversation. But for me, working at the state office, I'm thinking about our responsibility system-wide, right? It's why I wanted to work for our system, to be able to think about these things. And so this is where some relatively new work comes in. Dr. Lynn Palmentier-Holder is the current director of tribal relations and curriculum development at the Washington State Board. She also has a long history as a tribal leader with the Confederate Tribes of the Colville Reservation. Scholar, educator, counselor, all around fantastic person. And Lynn's work at the state board is really centered around doing the system level work of supporting American Indians and Alaska Native students, getting into programs, being successful with programs, but more importantly, ensuring that our colleges are developing government to government relationships with the tribes for which their colleges are sitting on. And beginning there to think about what enrollment looks like, how we're supporting students, what curriculum looks like, and developing an indigenous approach through curriculum and pathways. So we have a document about this that we would like you to read. I've gone back and forth about whether I would read it to you or have you read it, but I think it makes sense that you read it yourself. So Marcus Antonio is going to give you a link to this document that speaks to Dr. Lynn Palmentier-Holder's work, the advisory board that she has developed and their work, and thinking about ways that you might be able to connect either on your campus to what's happening here and or in your classroom. And then, so you're going to take about 5 minutes to read, and then we're going to come back, have a brief discussion. And from there, we're going to spend just a few minutes putting some thoughts into a Padlet. So the Padlet is really for sharing resources, sharing what you're reading, sharing what you're reading, sharing what you're looking at on social media, sharing videos that you have watched that are challenging to colonialism and coloniality, that are centering Indigenous perspectives and understandings and ways of knowing and learning, so that we can continue to build our own understandings and learning. So I will be getting us started on that Padlet with a few links, and I encourage others to add as well, and that can continue to be a living document that we return to show one another what we're learning, and maybe tell a little bit about how we're using what we're learning to disrupt our systems. So thank you so much for the time. Again, next you're going to be reading through a document having some reflection, and adding to a Padlet. I look forward to joining you all shortly.